Az Európai Bizottság elnökének és minden európai vezetőnek, hogy Magyarország nagyon szigorú álláspontot képvisel az illegális migráció kapcsán, nem fogad el semmilyen paktumot, meg ilyen allokációs mechanizmust.
And now we've got a big announcement from the new leader himself, and he has essentially rejected 90% of the EU sort of propositions, sent a message to Ursula von der Leyen and of course the European bureaucrats, and stated that they will not be having any migration pact.
Ursula von der Leyen is in absolute rage as Hungary rejects the Migrant Pact, sending shockwaves through the entire European Union. What was supposed to be a moment of unity has turned into a political blow-up, exposing deep cracks and brutal disagreements over migration control. This explosive clash has now escalated into a full-blown confrontation that nobody in Brussels saw coming.
Pretty much rejected 90% of the EU's demands and only accepting the anti-corruption measures.
Hungary's new leader didn't ease into power, didn't test the waters, didn't play along for a few weeks. He came in and dropped a political bomb. Around 90% of the European Union's demands were rejected. And the biggest shock of all is that he shut down the Migrant Pact immediately. On top of that, he doubled down on border control instead of loosening it.
Viktor Orban has been defeated after 16 years of uninterrupted power. Peter Magyar, the winner, is promising to restore relations between Brussels and Budapest.
There were a lot of alarms raised because essentially you had the Soros, you had Barack Obama, you had Hillary Clinton, you had Ursula von der Leyen celebrating this, lauding the fact that Viktor Orban was of course voted out of the presidency in Hungary.
And here's what makes it even more brutal. Just days before this, European leaders were celebrating as they had already won. They genuinely believed Hungary had finally fallen back in line, that the era of resistance was over, that this new leadership would align, cooperate, and follow the EU's direction. But instead, they walked straight into a wall.
It's not a sake of, having a Rupert Lowe figure and then going to Zach Palensky, for God's sake. The way that the left was celebrating it was almost the case. It was never the case, right?
Because what they thought was a victory turned into a rejection. Fast. And you can almost feel the shift. One moment it's praise, optimism, speeches about unity, and the next moment, silence. Probably frustration behind closed doors. Because this wasn't supposed to happen.
I would like to say that today Europe is Hungarian without any question. The people of Hungary have spoken and they have reclaimed their European path. It is a victory for fundamental freedoms.
The expectation was simple. New leader equals new direction. But that assumption completely collapsed. So what exactly did Hungary say no to?
Well, Hungary is like the sort of last country that kind of fends off the EU and doesn't want to be a part of this illegal immigrant dumping ground.
Let's break it down, because this wasn't random or emotional. It was very specific. First, the Migrant Pact. Completely rejected. No compromise there. Hungary made it clear they are not signing up for any system that forces them to take in migrants under EU quotas or agreements. Second, border control. Instead of loosening restrictions like many expected, they're actually strengthening them, reinforcing defenses, tightening policies, making it even harder for illegal migration to flow in.
És megtartjuk a déli határkerítést, sőt, be is fogjuk foltozni azokat a lyukakat, amik most ott vannak, mert hogy vannak lyukak azon a határkerítésen, valószínűleg nem is véletlenül.
Third, sovereignty. This is where it gets even more serious. Hungary basically signaled that EU directives will no longer automatically dictate national policy. They're drawing a line that what happens inside their borders is their decision. Now, it's not total rebellion, and this is important. Hungary didn't reject everything. They accepted certain anti-corruption measures backed by the EU. So this isn't chaos, it's selective cooperation. Now let's talk about the real flashpoint here, migration. Because this is where everything heats up.
For those of you that need a bit of more context, Hungary are currently fined €1 million a day due to them not accepting illegal migrants.
Hungary has been one of the most vocal countries in Europe when it comes to rejecting illegal migration policies, and the EU hasn't taken that lightly. In fact, Hungary is currently being fined €1 million per day for refusing to comply with migration-related rules. Think about that for a second. That's 365 million euros a year just in fines.
Mi őszintén beszélünk, és valóban szeretnénk megóvni a hazánkat és Európát is az illegális migrációtól. A migrációnak vannak legális formái, és azokat kell betartani. Úgyhogy azt tudom mondani, hogy meg fogjuk találni arra a módot, hogy ne kelljen tovább fizetni ezt a bírságot, hiszen ez nagyon hiányzik a magyar költségvetésből.
They're looking at countries spending billions every year on housing, processing, and managing large numbers of migrants. Compared to that, 365 million euros starts to look like a different kind of cost. Still heavy, but not overwhelming in the bigger picture. So from Hungary's perspective, it's not just about money, it's about control. They're essentially saying, we'd rather pay the price than lose control of our borders. And that's where this stops being just a policy disagreement. This becomes a power struggle.
I just spoke again with the Prime Minister-elect. Hungary has returned to the very heart of Europe where it has always belonged. This, and above all, a moment for Hungarian people, for their voice, their dignity, and their future in a safe, prosperous Hungary inside a strong Europe. We discussed immediate priorities. There is a swift work to be done to restore, realign, and reform.
Because the EU sees this as a matter of unity and shared responsibility. One system, one direction, everyone aligned. But Hungary is pushing back hard. They're saying no, national decisions come first. And that's a direct challenge to the EU's authority, which brings us back to the biggest question. How did the EU get this so wrong? Because this wasn't hidden. The signals were there. The political stance was clear. But somehow the assumption took over reality. They believed the narrative they wanted to believe, that Hungary was changing direction, that resistance was over, that this new leader would cooperate. But instead, they got the opposite.
And I really want to say to the Hungarian people, you've done it again, against all odds, like you did in 1956, when you courageously stood up, like you did it in 1989, when you were the first to cut the barbed wire.
And now, the situation is awkward, to say the least. Public praise has turned into quiet tension, expectations have collapsed, and the political optics? Not great. Because celebrating someone who then rejects your core policies, that's not just a miscalculation, that's a very public one. And Hungary knows it. They've made their position clear. No, Migrant Pact, stronger borders, selective cooperation, national control. Just a line drawn in the sand. And now the pressure shifts back to the EU. What do they do next?
So with this result, our union is stronger. Our union is more united. It was an exceptional evening yesterday.
Now here's where it gets even more interesting, because to understand why this shocked everyone, you have to rewind a bit. Go back to the election result. The moment it was announced, the reaction was instant. I mean instant. Media outlets, political commentators, global figures, everyone jumped in at the same time with the same takeaway. Hungary is back. That was the narrative. No hesitation, no second thought. It was like they had been waiting for this exact moment.
I absolutely love that the bureaucrats fell for it and the left-wing nutters fell for it, because I did think something didn't really add up with the fact that this guy was right-wing if he was going to be playing in the hands to the EU.
And the assumption spread fast. Hungary, according to them, was finally returning to the European Union's line, falling back into alignment. Playing ball again, you could almost feel the relief in the way people were talking about it, like a problem had just been solved overnight. But here's the thing. Nobody really stopped to ask a very basic question. Who actually won?
Amit Orbánék tettek, hogy nem találtak erre egy jogi megoldást, hogy az illegális migránsok kint maradjanak, és a pénzt Magyarországon ne kelljen fizetni, de ez már egy másik kérdés. A lényeg az, hogy meg fogjuk oldani, és a Tisza az egy szigorú politikát fog folytatni az illegális migráció kapcsán. Köszönöm.
Not in a headline way, not in a surface level way, but actually look deeper into what this new leadership stood for. Because if they had done that, this whole Hungary is back narrative would have fallen apart immediately. Instead, what happened was classic. People saw a change in leadership and assumed a change in direction. Simple equation, right? Old leader out, new leader in, must be a full reset, except it wasn't. And that's where the real mistake started. Now let's talk about the panic that kicked in around Viktor Orbán's exit, because this is where things got dramatic. You had commentators acting like Hungary had just completely flipped overnight.
És ellentétben Orbán Viktorral nem fogunk kiengedni 2200 jogerősen elítélt embercsempészt a magyar börtönökből. Nem fogunk migránsokat szállítani a szlovák határra, hogyha éppen a szlovák szoci haverunknak az érdeke ezt kívánja a választási kampányban.
Suddenly, Hungary was no longer the resistance, no longer the country pushing back against EU migration policies. It was like people believed the gates were about to swing open any second. There was this idea floating around that Hungary was the last line of defense in Europe when it came to strict migration control. And once Orbán was out, that line was gone. But that fear wasn't based on facts. It was based on perception. People weren't reacting to what was actually happening. They were reacting to what they thought was about to happen. Big difference.
To make a swift and overdue progress to the benefit of the Hungarian people. There's much work to be done as Hungary is coming back to the European path. But today, of course, is a day to celebrate.
Because if you slow it down for a second and actually look at it, nothing about the election result guaranteed a policy shift. Nothing. It just looked that way from the outside. And that brings us to the biggest illusion in this whole situation. This was never a left versus right battle, not even close. The way it was being framed, you'd think Hungary went from one extreme to the complete opposite, like a total ideological flip, but in reality, it was more like switching lanes on the same road.
The guy that actually won the election was still a right-wing party. It was almost like having Rupert Lowe as the Prime Minister and then going to Nigel Farage.
A better way to put it, it wasn't a radical change. It was right-wing to right-wing. That's it. And yet, the celebration from global figures was massive. You had high-profile leaders, big political names, all reacting like this was some historic turning point, like Hungary had just rejoined a completely different political world. Which makes you wonder what exactly they were celebrating, because it clearly wasn't the actual policies. It felt more like they were celebrating the idea of change, not the reality of it. Optics over substance, headlines over details. And then came the moment that really sealed it, the EU's response.
But today, of course, is a day to celebrate. So I want to recall what I once said in a speech to the Hungarian people. We are one family. Your story is our story. Your future is our future. And we will walk with you every step of the way.
Ursula von der Leyen came out strong and confident, almost emotional, talking about Hungary returning to the heart of Europe, about unity, shared values, all of it. The tone was clear. This was a victory. But here's the problem: that speech came before anything was actually confirmed, before policies were announced, before positions were clarified, before the new leader had even made a real move. That's like celebrating the result of a game before the final whistle. And that's why it backfired so badly, because just days later, the same leader they were praising turned around and rejected most of what they expected him to support.
They're being fined by the EU because they don't want to be a dumping ground. And this new Prime Minister is on the same side as the Hungarian people and said, no, we don't want illegal migrants.
And that's a dangerous game in politics, because reality doesn't adjust to your expectations. Now flip to the EU side, and you can almost feel the mood shift, which means this isn't just a political moment, it could be a turning point. Because what started as a celebration turned into a reality check real fast. And now the real question is, who's next?